Love seeing these numbers climb. Just while we're waiting, we'll take the first 2 minutes to let the room fill up. If you want to drop where you're joining us from in the chat, always love learning where people are calling in from. Hello, hello. Okay. Nobody wants to share where they're calling in from yet. Okay. Markham. Shout out to Markham. Shout out to North York. Okay. And the participation list is growing. That's good. That's good. Hopefully everyone had a good lunch. Could sneak in a good meal before we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. Okay. Kingston. Hello, hello. Vancouver. Got some West Coasters. Kitchener. Kelowna, BC. BC represent. Lots of Toronto. Some London. Hello from Whitby. Kamloops. Boyanna calling in from Waterloo. My hometown. Okay, Alberta. Oakville. Awesome. Okay. Well, we've got a great coast-to-coast participation here. This is really exciting. Montreal, bonjour. That's as good as it gets for me. Okay. Well, it looks like the room has filled up. We're gonna jump in and thanks again for dropping your location in the chat. Really excited to be talking with everyone today about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. So we're going to get started. The chat won't be active, but the Q&A feature will be. So hello from Edmonton, Alberta. So hi everyone, my name is Andrea Bartlett, and I am a straight cisgendered female, and my pronouns as they're listed in the panel are she and her, and I'm the director of HR here at HUME. So we have some fantastic panelists here with us today, and we're really excited to be speaking with you about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And before I get started, I'd really like to take some time to talk about something that's very important, and that's the land acknowledgement. So at this time, I'd like to acknowledge that while we are all online, nonetheless, we do occupy Indigenous lands. And so it's important to acknowledge our history, the good and the bad, so that we can find a way forward. So in this regard, we look forward to truth and reconciliation for Indigenous people. So where the truth is acknowledging the hurt that we've caused by stealing their land, and the reconciliation are, most importantly, the actions that we're taking towards supporting Indigenous communities moving forward. And so with that acknowledgement of the land, I'd also like to acknowledge some of the fantastic team members and support. So I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Subcommittee, the executive team, Sneha and Darius, as well as some of our HUME team members, Alyssa and Evelyn, who are managing all things in the background. So let's jump in and talk about the event details and why we're here. So of course, we're here to go over equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And we'll learn about allyship, inclusive language, and answer some of those top of mind questions. So thank you for the folks who submitted things online, who emailed in advance. We've had some great top of mind questions that we're going to dig into and talk about. And we also have our in-house expert here at HUME, Sneha. Sneha is going to be speaking again as an expert on the panelists. So hello. And we have Darius Sukram, who is the president of Entelechy Consulting. And so our goal here is to ask questions, to reflect, and to participate, and really make sure that, being vulnerable is okay as you're asking questions, as you're engaging in the Q&A. I know I myself am here, to learn and to participate as well as to be vulnerable. And really, we want everybody that's joining to be able to have some takeaway tools for you to be successful, talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion with your team. So the session is an hour long. We'll spend the first 20 minutes talking and learning about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And then we'll shift to the engagement session around the Q&A questions that were submitted before the panel. And so again, thanks to everybody who used the chat function to let me know and let the panelists know where you're joining from. But as a friendly housekeeping reminder, please do use the Q&A function to submit some of your questions. I will be monitoring that to the best of my ability. I know my team is also monitoring that as well. So please make sure that you use the Q&A. And so with that, I will now pass it over to Sneha and to Darius to kick off our presentation.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have all of you here. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sneha, and I identify as a cisgendered, straight, racialized woman with a disability. And my pronouns, as you may see, are she and her, and I am the People and Culture Specialist here at HUME. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in the Middle East, and my parents had actually immigrated themselves to the UAE. I'm a Pakistani and have lived a very much of a privileged childhood. I went to private school. I was around people who looked and talked like me, and it was a really good upbringing thanks to my parents. I ended up coming to Canada at 17 by myself to pursue my further education, and that's when I was not in my comfort zone. It was great having the freedom of being away from home, but also scary being alone. Being Pakistani, I was accustomed to being pulled aside at airports because of the color of my passport, stopped for no reason at all. But this was something that was really normal to me. I didn't really know any different, nor did I think I was being discriminated against. But now it was really more apparent being in a foreign country where I did feel singled out. So to balance that out, though, I did have a great support network at university and was able to feel like I belonged through them and through these people that I met. And very proud to say that a lot of these amazing people are still in my life today. From a career standpoint, I graduated from Ted Rogers School of Management and built my career in HR. I started at an HR consulting company and had the opportunity to actually move back into education to help build the first career center at Ted Rogers, and decided to then pursue my career in HR further and got my designation. During this time, however, I was diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases, and so it took some time to focus on my health and put my well-being first. When I came back, I wanted to see what it was like on the other side, but I was very, very anxious making a career move and very scared because folks, managers, friends, colleagues, family, everyone told me not to share my story about my disability. While I understood there's still a stigma out there, I was also frankly quite annoyed because I didn't want to go somewhere where I didn't belong. But I took the leap of faith and joined a professional services firm in campus recruitment. I loved what the firm was doing from a well-being and equity, diversity, inclusion standpoint, and so ended up in a national diversity inclusion team where I was then focused on the strategy there for about 2 years. I recently joined HUME in May 2021, so I'm only 7 weeks old, and dove right into building an EDI strategy and solidifying our partnership with IntelliKey Consulting, which I'll share more about that story later. EDI is really important to me because I want to close the gap of the lack of knowledge and awareness that folks have in the space overall. More specifically, bringing my experience being South Asian, I grew up learning to have the humility in me. Be humble, respect the hierarchical structure, appreciating what you got, do not question the status quo. This is all that I knew, but I know this is not how it's meant to be. So I know there are folks out there, probably specifically women of color, who may be facing similar experiences where they're just not comfortable to share. They are covering. So this space is important for me to educate not only for myself, but to others. Being comfortable with the uncomfortable. We're not unfortunately given a handbook on what the right thing to do is, but the right thing is to educate yourself, ask questions, have an open dialogue, and I hope to accomplish that in my role here at HUME. Darius, would love to hear more about you.
Sure. Thank you for that kind introduction. And it's an honor to be here to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. which is really about love and belonging for everyone. My name is Darius Sukram. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a heterosexual, racialized, cisgendered male. If you can take that all in and digest it, I have a strong love and appreciation for all people. My family was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I moved here with my parents, who came here with less than $200 in their pockets when I was about 2 years old. My experiences in Canada, I remember being in kindergarten for the first time and wanting to interact and be friends with this little girl whose name was Sarah. And when I wanted to play with her, she told me that I was too dirty to play with her. And obviously, you know, when you're a kid, you say things that are just on your mind or how you feel. But when I really unpacked this, and, you know, of course, this is a vulnerable moment for me as well. But when I unpacked it much later on, I had associated the concept of being dirty with the color of my skin. And so my mission, or part of my purpose in life, is to try to make a safe space for everyone. I don't want others who look like me or feel like me in those spaces to feel like they can't be themselves and who they want to be or who they need to be. So my educational background, from that point on, I took an interest in political science. I did my master's in public policy, and I've served in leadership, in government, in education, and in business. I've lectured at universities, and I sit on several boards and committees that seek to help serve the public good. And today I'm here as president of Entelechy, proud to partner with Humi, who has a strong desire to work and build inclusion into their framework and into their culture. So I hope that not only do my experiential knowledge or my the knowledge I've gained through school, I hope to combine all those things with Sneha and Andrea and share the experiences that I have to help you build a safer, more inclusive, diverse space for others in your workspace. So I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation and learning a little bit about some of the questions that you have as well. So I guess from there, we'll move on into a discussion of the terms that are important, as we always talk about, and obviously Sneha, Andrea, and myself and have talked about the importance of setting the foundation in spaces that we're in. So in order to understand what we're going to be talking about, we need to better understand the terms. So diversity, as you can see here, are the differences in lived experiences, perspectives, and reality of people that may include race, ethnicity, color, ancestry, place of origin, political belief, religion, marital status, family, physical ability, mental disability, sex, gender, identity, expression, sexual orientation, age, class, and socioeconomic status. There's a lot of things in there, but what that really means is that we are able to recognize the differences among us. Within those descriptions there, you can see that there are internal differences like our sex or our race. These are things that we identify with that are personal to us. And then you also have external differences. So these are things like religion or political belief. These are things that you're able to change over the course of time, right? Even though they might be very close to your identity and upbringing. And then you have organizational. If you look at Humi's creating their own culture, and your own businesses for that matter have their own culture as well. And then looking at worldview, which is essentially the way we see things, how we view things politically. Those things may change, but they're much more influenced by external factors that are around the world. So all of these types of diversity help shape who we are. Next, we have inclusion. Inclusion is an active, intentional, and continuous process to address inequities in power and privilege, and to build a respectful community that ensures all diverse people and groups feel valued, respected, and welcome. This is essentially about ensuring that all team members are integrated and supported, which is fundamental to achieving success in any organization. So where diversity is recognizing the differences that may be among us, the inclusion aspect is about making us feel good where we're at and in the space that we're in. Next up, we have equity. Equity refers to achieving parity in process, in policy, process, treatment, outcomes for underrepresented, racialized, and marginalized groups while accounting for diversity. It considers power, privilege, access, and opportunities and treatment and impacts in several areas. It can be representational based on resources and also having an equity mindfulness. So this is really about, when we talk about diversity, we're again looking at differences. When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about how people feel. When we're looking at equity, we're trying to our best to balance the playing field so that we are removing barriers for groups that may experience underrepresentation so that they can feel better included, so that we can feel better included. So equity, not equality, is about balancing the playing field for everyone to ensure that they feel good about who they are and where they are. And next up, we have inclusive language. Inclusive language is the deliberate selection of vocabulary which avoids explicit or implicit exclusion of particular groups, that avoids the use of false generic terms, usually with reference to gender. I'm going to point to Sneha in a moment. Actually, why don't I point to you now? You came up with a great example when we were talking just a few days ago. Sneha, can you elaborate a little bit about inclusive language?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Darius. I mean, for me, inclusive language it's really important that we just cannot assume someone's identity, right? So we want to make sure that we're creating a space where people feel that they belong. And a lot of that comes with the language that we use. And so one of the things that is very common that I know I have definitely, been the one saying it myself quite often, and I have to catch myself, is, hey, guys, or hey, ladies. And, you don't know who on the other end, how they might identify. And so therefore, a more, I would say, neutral way of saying things would be, hey, folks, hey, team, hey, friends, hey, everyone. And so for me, those small steps really make a big difference in creating that inclusive culture where people really feel that they belong and they're not singled out as, per the definition, being excluded because of reference to gender.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the thoughts and ideas around this concept. The reason why we're introducing it in this space is because inclusive language helps build the way how people feel. It helps build diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as Sneha mentioned, if you're able to use more open language like, hey, everyone, or hey, folks, then you start to build a culture where people can feel comfortable and see themselves within that culture. If someone cannot see themselves within that space, like if I just kept saying, hey, guys, I slowly begin to isolate and further marginalize people who would want to be included in the space. And that's not good for diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's not good for business either. The next term that we're going to go over briefly is the term ally. This one is very, very important. In order to be an ally, you have to have that mindset that we talked about, an equity mindset. You have to seek inclusion, and you have to use inclusive language. So an ally is a member of a different group who works to end a form of discrimination for a particular individual or designated group. In some of the smaller conversations that I've had with friends and organizations as well, folks have thought of allyship to be something that is altruistic and doesn't necessarily benefit you. But at the end of the day, when we look at allyship, it's really about everyone. When you're an ally, if I can be an ally to women like Andrea and Sneha, or if they can be an ally to racialized folks like me, then we're able to create a stronger community together that promotes diversity, equity, inclusion. And allyship is so, so necessary when you have a certain level of power or privilege in order to enable diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are the terms that we're working with. I'm sure the team will let us know, or let Andrea know, if you have any questions regarding these terms, or there may be some nuances that you might want to ask about. But we're here to share our information and to respond to the questions that you've asked for us. So hope this sets up the conversation for success as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Perfect.
I'll pass it back to you, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get into it. I know that a lot of the people who have called in today have very niche questions, very specific questions to their business. And so thanks again, both Darius and Sneha, both for sharing your expertise. as well as for sharing just the definitions that we all need to understand foundationally as we work to build more diverse and inclusive workplaces. So starting with one of the most frequently asked questions, why do we think that diversity is important in the workplace? And why doesn't diversity imply inclusion? So I'll pass that to Darius to start.
Sure, thank you for the question. And I see also the question in the chat. I'm sure we'll get around to that question. It's a really great question on equity. So diversity is important in the workplace because it generates more profitability, more dollars for your business. It's not just the right thing to do, it is the thing that is profitable to do. This is just one aspect of it, but if you look at organizations and companies that have improved diversity, when you look into the specific details of it, and you see that women specifically are in these organizations within leadership, your organization has been proven to generate 21 to 25% more income for your business. So that's a really, really good thing. When you see racialized people or people of color, or Black Indigenous folks as well, you can also see 30 to 35% increase in profitability for your organization. Larger organizations that you might think of, like Coca-Cola or Johnson & Johnson, and others, have been moving in this realm to create more equity, diversity, inclusion in those spaces. So when we're looking at diversity, it's not just something that is good because it's right to do, but it's also something that is very profitable for business. In line with this concept, diversity also provides you a wider range of perspectives. If you look at our panel alone, and I'm sure even when I look at location diversity, right? When I look from that perspective, people from Mississauga, Montreal, Edmonton, Alberta, like all of these differences that we have in places that we work and our experiences help to inform our perspective. So this also will contribute to innovation in your workspace. So those who have faced challenges, like if you listen to Sneha's story, which I have a strong admiration for, coming here at 17 years old to navigate an entirely new space is not something that everyone is familiar with. So when you get people that have those experiences, they can contribute in ways that can be valued more than just from a baseline perspective within a business workplace. They're very good at being solutions oriented and thinking broadly on how to solve problems. And then on this note too, it's also very good for your reputation. A lot of folks are looking at EDI. There's a lot of buzz around it and things like that. But beyond that, it's also good for your hiring practices, for bringing in talent, for actually benefiting your organization. So when you look at all these things together, you can very clearly see that diversity is good for business. And more specifically, it's also good for your business. And the reason why diversity doesn't imply inclusion is because we talked about it earlier. Diversity is the way everyone looks, right? And inclusion is the way everyone feels. So if you want to really make an impact, you don't want to just have diversity, which is ultimately necessary. You want to make sure that when people come onto your organization, when they sign up with you, what does their first day look like? Are there spaces for them to celebrate their religion? Are there spaces for them to celebrate their culture? Is there pay equity that doesn't lead to microaggressions or other things like that? So when you're looking at diversity, know that it doesn't imply inclusion. Inclusion is how you make others feel and the steps you take to empower them. And also remember that diversity is good for business. But I know I've said a lot there. I'll pass it over to Sneha. I know she has a lot to say as well. What I missed, Sneha?
I think you covered a good variety, but thanks, Darius. Yeah, I mean, for me, very much, Darius, you hit the nail on the head, I think, with a lot of it. For me, I think it's also just really important, especially in my role right here, it's employee engagement, right? And that comes in line with that inclusivity piece. And so when people feel included, they feel that they belong, they want to work, they're motivated. And so part of that, one of the things that actually Andrea shared earlier was you can't be what you can't see. And that really resonated with me, because if I don't see myself in the company, if I don't see people who talk like me, even in leadership, it's very hard for me to be like, okay, I see a path here. And so for me, that's really important, where I'm really reflecting on the quote of where many, I think, would have heard of this, Verna Myers, where she quotes, "Diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance." And so that's why, to kind of add to that, diversity does not imply inclusion, because it's really easy to measure diversity, but what is the work that's being done to really build a strong sense of connection and belonging? And that comes with prioritizing trust, building that psychological safety, and where your team will feel comfortable to ask those questions, express their thoughts. And that takes work. It takes time. It's not something that can happen overnight, but it's something that everyone should be mindful of, that while, yes, diversity is important, as equally so is inclusion.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you both, Darius and Sneha. We have quite a number of questions that have come in, and Sneha, I'm actually going to pass this one over to you, because I think you can speak a lot about the journey very candidly that you and I have gone through at HUME. So quite a few questions here about where to start. Obviously, we're talking about creating equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, but how do you go about starting an EDI program in your company? And then we have other questions about hiring and whatnot. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So I think, so when I first joined, EDI was part of my mandate, and on top of recruitment and training and development. I, quite frankly, for me, when joining the team, I've been in teams and D&I spaces where I've had to drive strategy that already existed. So this was the first experience where I had to build something from scratch. And that's quite frankly, very daunting. And so right off the bat, for me, what was really important is, again, that trust piece. Folks, unfortunately, don't trust HR. And so for me, it was really important. How do we build that trust, and how do we provide an unbiased kind of way for folks to feel comfortable that they can be themselves? And so that for me was then needing to go external and working with a third-party vendor. So the way I started was researching different D&I practitioners and companies that are in the space. There's so many that I would love to shout out, but there's so many out there in Canada as well. I had initial conversations with them to understand what they offered from an education standpoint, from a support standpoint, and of course, budget. But what was really important to me, because I wanted to close the knowledge gap, to make sure that we're having that base level knowledge, making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page right off the bat, but also understanding we're super green in this space. This is something that we're building from scratch. And so having flexibility and customization was also really important to me, and having a consultant or a vendor that would allow for that. And so that's what really solidified our relationship with IntelliKey Consulting, and, very proud to partner with Darius in this space. And, someone may ask, is it necessary? Is it worth it? And quite frankly, sometimes being in the space, you can question yourself, am I doing the right thing? Am I taking the right steps? Because this is a very challenging role where you are going to have folks come to you and you may not know what to do. And so having that sanity check, having that third party, having someone like a Darius is super helpful, because it just feels that you are on the same page and you can then go together. So that's kind of my thoughts there.
And I can build on that if you'd like, Andrea, if there's time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the sentiment there. Having someone like a Darius, that's a quotable thing right there. So I really appreciate the work there. But when we look at EDI, and I know a lot of you folks are wondering, how do you begin? You start the conversation by asking questions, right? Asking questions here, asking questions in other spaces, asking questions in every space where you feel like you can. And then following up and doing your part by educating yourself, reading a book or taking courses. There's so many spaces that offer free online training in all of these spaces, learning about diversity, equity, inclusion. As Sneha mentioned, you can hire experts to help steer the conversation and experiences. But you can also create a space for, if you're a leader in your organization, creating a survey to ask people about not only how they feel, but who they are. It's very difficult to create an inclusive space in your workplace, albeit online for the large part of the past, 1 or 2 years, but it's very difficult to do that if you aren't able to know who they are. So that's also very important, setting up, Andrea mentioned earlier, she gave a shout out to her EDI team, which I've been very fortunate to have conversations with and to talk with about the journey together as we move to try to engage and promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. And a committee goes a long way. Then you can also hire a diversity specialist within your organization. But let me just say that it's not solely a human resources person job to do equity, diversity, and inclusion. Let me also overtly say it's not the one Black girl within the organization. It's not her job to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's everyone's shared responsibility to do that, regardless of where they're at. It's about learning, educating yourself, and finding avenues to participate in those spaces. And then I would say two more things, having inclusive policies, creating those policies. What do they look like? Do people have religious holidays off that are fair and not just one central Christmas holiday? I personally celebrate Christmas, but I know a lot of my friends celebrate Hanukkah and different other things. So are there being spaces for those things? And then also a budget. A lot of times people want EDI without putting the dollars there. And my mentors have told me in the past that, Darius, if you look at the money on any budget or on any spreadsheet, they will tell you what their priorities are. So if your budget is $0 for diversity, equity, and inclusion, then I imagine that the scope and the way people feel within your workplace is also going to reflect that. So I think these are a number of tools or ways that you can begin, but ultimately it's about starting the conversation. Even if you don't know where to begin, start it with somebody, start it with a neighbor, a friend. There are ways, there's so many great resources online available. So good luck. And I know that you can do it if you put your heart into it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Darius. And I think it's also important to recognize, and as we've done at HUME, starting small, building a committee first. We'll actually come back to another question around ownership of EDI, around HR and senior leadership in a minute, but it's also important to recognize that this can be emotionally exhausting work. And so making sure that when we're defining what the EDI committee is, if that's the route that you take as your first step before you engage with externals, before you participate in an EDI survey, it's again really important to recognize the work that's being done and prepare your team members for that. So also just wanted to add that there. We have a number of questions.
Sorry, Andrea, I just want to chime in just a little bit at the end, because I think you said something super important that I think many companies may not think of, as this work is emotionally exhausting. And so if you are having that one person be your D&I expert, provide that resource, provide that support, but also more so provide that mental health support. Increase that mental health budget for that team, for that person, because of the fact that this is not easy to do. And so go look beyond what you're already offering from a well-being and benefit standpoint. Is there some things that you can, provide from an employee assistance program support, like additional support there? Think about different things from a mental health standpoint that you can use to support your D&I team, committee, and folks running the strategy.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. And so the next question that has come up a few times, folks emailed it in as well as I see it in the chat, is actually around the use of pronouns. Of course, HUME launched pronouns within its platform, but I know that for many of the folks who are joining, they may want to know, how do I go about introducing the use of pronouns within my organization?
So I'm happy to take the first, participate first here. I think pronouns are super important. We talked a little bit about inclusive language and how that can impact how people feel. And ultimately, Sneha talked about, having an invitation to the party versus being asked to dance. So we're in the space right now, and, Andrea, myself, and Sneha have also all provided our pronouns. And sometimes I had a tough conversation with a friend, actually. It wasn't that tough because he really has a genuine love and appreciation for everyone and who they are. And he thought that, why do I need to say that I identify as he, him, when it's so very clear that that's who I am? But when we choose to personally identify who we are, it's not necessarily only about us. In this space, I acknowledge that as a cisgendered man, which essentially means that my sex assigned at birth as male matches who I identify with as a person in my gender, which is also male. So when I use the pronouns he, him, it's not about me saying, oh, look at me, this is who I am. It's about me saying, hey, this is my privilege in he, him. And by me identifying that, I hope that others, whether they choose to or not, it's totally up to them, but I hope that they feel comfortable identifying who they are. And I want those who may look like me, but actually be prefer to be referred to as they, them, or she, her, to feel comfortable within the LGBTQ plus community, or within, you know, the women's community, or within the BIPOC community. And ultimately, by creating these spaces, if you just add them at your email signature, it sends an implicit message to everyone that you embrace others regardless of how they identify and what they look and feel like. So that's what I would say about, you know, having pronouns. They're incredibly important. It may seem simple to you, but for someone else, it can mean the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to kind of add on to that, I mean, for me, I've always been very comfortable sharing my pronouns, whether that's on social media. So I have it on LinkedIn, I have it on Twitter. Recently, Slack has a pronouns feature. We have it in Humi. There's many avenues now, especially as you were looking at, you know, using social media tools where you can include your pronouns. So when I actually joined Humi, I had it as part of my name. So I had Sneha, she, her, and the only other person who had it was really Andrea. And so, you know, I think that it comes with how do we make sure that we can lead with example, and then, you know, obviously with everyone's comfort level and how open they feel that they want to share, that then they start doing that. Even in meetings, when I talk about who I am and how I identify, I always start with my identification as, and then this is how, and these are what my pronouns are. So very similar to how I introduce myself today is what I even do in team meetings, because then that just allows and creates a space of openness and an example for others to follow, because sometimes people just don't know, and you know, they will just continue doing what they do know. And so being able to provide those concrete examples, leading by it, is something that I stand by.
Thank you, Sneha, and thank you, Darius. So on that path around, you know, creating inclusivity within the workplace, we have a question around age inclusivity, actually, and the fact that more and more there is a large age gap between clients, team members, and leadership. So what can we do within our workplaces to make sure that all ages feel included in the workplace?
I can start there. I love the question of age, because I'm sure that it's personal to the person who's asking, but you know, and this also correlates. I'm going to tie it together here a little bit. The first question: does equity for one group lead to others feeling left out or lost? And I think I would say to this, whether it's age, because this is a form of a demographic that's part of your internal diversity. Your age, you cannot change that. You cannot self-identify as much as we would like to as we age, as identifying as being younger. But I would say this to this question: creating safe spaces for everyone, whether you need to identify specific groups, you know, whether it's younger folks, or whether it's, you know, Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate, or Indigenous community members that have all been in the relevant media recently, but have a long extended history in these experiences. It's about creating a space for people to feel included. And when you create that space in general for everyone to feel included, or by specifically targeting groups to help them feel included, it's not something that it's like, oh, well, you helped out this person who was 17 years old or 21 years old, you're now anti 65 plus years old. It doesn't work like that. I am a man and I can be pro-female without being anti-male. So it's a bit of shifting the understanding, where people think that age is a limitation, or age is somewhere is an experience where people can't contribute in the same way. Some of the most, now to answer your question more specifically, some of the most successful spaces that I've been able to create within places that I've worked in, government or business organizations, have been mentorship programs. Mentorship programs work really, really well. Whether you're trying to bring forward and keep retention within your organization, or bring diverse members ahead, or bring women ahead, or even help navigate the journey of younger people. When you have someone who is older, they generally have more experience in life, more knowledge, more hands-on experience in developing policy or whatever that the specifics are within that organization. And the younger person often has more innovation at mind, more experience with technology. And these are very two large assumptions. I will make that very, very clear. But when you create space for everyone to engage in mentorship and in working together, you're able to share knowledge and information to build something that's greater. So if you're feeling like you're being challenged in the workplace, I would say advocate for mentorship programs to allow people to experience and share their knowledge in a way. By doing that, you unpack biases. You also create a space for knowledge and intellectual transfer of information from one party to the other. And when it's really good, it becomes reciprocal and synergistic. And that has a long lasting effect on teams. So in short, create mentorship opportunities, but also be mindful that when you help one group, it doesn't mean that you're putting another group down. By helping groups that are marginalized or are underrepresented, you actually help bring everyone up by doing those things. So that's what I'd say to that question.
Thank you, Darius. I know candidly, we had that conversation at HUME where some of the team members felt as though, what can I do as a straight white man? What happens for me? I don't relate to some of the problems that are being discussed in some of our internal training. So I think that you position that very, very well. And it's about elevating all and creating that inclusive space. So I want to switch gears for a moment and talk externally, and then we're going to answer some of the questions around EDI within hiring and structuring promotional paths with equity, diversity, and inclusion in mind. So to start, again, focusing externally, I have two questions here. The first, and I'll direct this to you, Darius, to start. So can you speak to calling out performative allyship internally? So the same organizations with rainbow logos and EDI initiatives can internally be quite toxic to those who work at them. So can you talk about calling out performative allyship?
Thank you for that question. It's a really, really tough one. And if you're asking that, it means that you have some level of allyship or stake in the game to want to call out action. So I think that's anonymous, but I applaud you, whoever it is, for feeling that way in a desire to help others. And I think, doing this is very tough. Sneha mentioned it earlier, and she picked up on it really quickly, which is not something that, I've been able to have this in different conversations, but this work can be very exhausting, not because it's hard to do, but because you're so emotionally invested, sharing your story, sharing your experiences. Oftentimes, and I think the McKinsey Institute did a study on this. They talked about how folks that are racialized and have racialized experiences experience 7 times the amount of stress that a normal person doing their job does. Why? Because their first inclination is not to be like, oh man, this person did this to me. No, this can't be a racialized experience. It can't be a racial. There's no way it could be. And they internalize that. And then they go through not just one iteration of that, but several other experiences with a person in the workplace or several other people in the workspace that make them feel that. Then they're like, you know what, this has happened so many times. I've now built up my emotional energy. I don't know where I can go. And the first step to do is to reach out to somebody who you trust, somebody who's a friend, an ally. And that can be somebody who's not within the workplace. And you navigate that conversation and you say, hey, Sneha, you won't believe this. I was at work and this happened. Do you think that, and Sneha will, because she's objective, she'll be like, yes, Darius, that was an experience that was unfair to you. And now we start navigating there. And then we start having these side conversations of how to build it in the workplace, because the workplace doesn't have it built in already. So yes, performative allyship is a thing. You got to think about your emotional energy. Do you have the energy to do that, to confront the unfairness, the implicit bias, the overt racism, the covert racism, whatever it may be? Do you have the energy to do that? If you do have the energy to do that, there's several places you can go. You can go to human resources, which, as Sneha mentioned, sometimes there's not trust there. You can go to an EDI committee if you have one. You can go to your manager and talk about it, or you can have an email and structure it and say, hey, I'm not really sure how people feel about this, but I'm going to send an email. Hey, Andrea, I'm nervous. Can I talk to you about this? I want to talk to you about something that's important to me, and having those conversations. So there's a number of places that you can go. Not all of these spaces are guaranteed to be safe, but there's different ways of doing it. So if you want to have that conversation, maybe you don't just say, hey, this is overt discrimination against one party or person. Maybe you say, hey, whatever organization, hey, Glass organization, I noticed that diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming more and more popular in Canadian society. Having our multicultural act and having, more profitability and opportunities, I would love an opportunity to talk about how we can do diversity, equity, and inclusion better. And by framing it in a positive way, you're now giving yourself some power and autonomy to see how they reflect. Are they interested in that conversation, or are they pushing it away? If they're pushing it away, you might need a consultant, you might need something more, you might not feel safe there. You might need a new space for yourself. But if they embrace that idea, now you have something to work with, building an EDI community, building mentorship, and those other things. So that's where I would take it with that. Make sure you have enough emotional capacity for yourself there.
Yeah, that's great. And we do, in the interest of time, we do have 6 more questions that I want to make sure that we get through. And you talked about courage, you talked about a lot of things there. But there's a question here around where we start to create an EDI committee in the workplace and who should be involved. So Sneha, maybe you want to take that one on. And again, in the interest of time, to get through the questions, we're going to have to keep our responses short and sweet.
Yeah, no, for sure. Andrea, I think this is a story that I think you are more able to share, because when you first joined, so when Andrea joined last year in September, she was tasked by our CEO, Simon, to think about EDI and how can we incorporate that here. And so being able to kind of build some sort of place to start was actually through our EDI committee. So Andrea did a call out to our, what we call Humigos, our internal employees, and basically did a call out to ask if anyone was interested in to raise their hand to be involved, to develop policies, strategy, to review, to essentially be that validator in kind of what we are doing in part of this process. And so right now we have a committee of 9 folks on the team, including us as the people and culture team, and we meet on a monthly basis to kind of go through what we're doing for the rest of the month. In terms of right now, it's a lot of it working with Entelechy to kind of figure out our education piece, and so that's kind of where a lot of the focus is in right now. But again, for what I do every week with the EDI committee, we have a channel on Slack, and I do a Teachable Tuesdays. And so I just throw in resources and education around, different topics such as microaggressions or anti-racism. I talk about the Indigenous communities, especially in light of what the Indigenous community has been facing recently. And so again, creating a space where you can come together and have these conversations.
Great. And I think the last thing that I would add there is that when doing a call out, it's important that people understand what they're signing up for. So I did a lot of connecting with my mentors, people within the HR community, people that work specifically within the EDI community. And I worked with them to understand what kind of a mandate is reasonable, again, for a small business, a business who is very early on in its journey, trying not to boil the ocean, as the saying goes, and take on way too many things right at the start. But I think Sneha covered that fantastically. And so we have a few questions around hiring processes, best practices. And so I'm going to actually go to a question that was submitted by email. So as a small business that has less than 20 employees, that has never explicitly implemented any sort of equity, diversity, and inclusion policies, they certainly avoid discriminatory practices in hiring and managing employees. Should they be looking to evaluate and measure themselves from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, and then address any deficiencies? If so, how do we do that through policy?
Sneha, I saw you unmute, so you can go ahead first if you'd like.
Yeah. And then please, feel free to chime in, Darius, because I think you have a lot more expertise here as well. So for me, I think with hiring, I would like to kind of measure that, because without data, you don't know where you're at. And for me, data is super important, because that not only will try to understand where you're supposed to go, what are you supposed to change. And reason why data is important, because you cannot infer. You cannot assume, again, people's identities, as we talked about earlier. So while someone may look Asian or South Asian or East or Southeast Asian, we cannot infer that. And so being able to kind of create maybe questions through the hiring process, if folks are comfortable sharing that, or through a self-identification survey, through onboarding, these are different ways that you can gather that data. But again, the important piece is the self-identification piece, where people are willingly open to share that information with you, rather than you making that inference yourself. I don't know, Darius, does that align with what you're thinking?
Oh, for sure. It definitely aligns. If you didn't see there, I was doing a little clap for you, because I think data is so very important. And I will say this, you have to, saying that you're promoting diversity, equity, inclusion is not enough. Diversity, equity, inclusion, allyship. These are active, intentional actions that need to be taken. So when you're looking at diversity, you can't, like, you might check a few boxes here and there. I saw one of the questions in the chat, but that's not good enough. You have to actually make sure that the workforce that you're hiring is actually as diverse and and has the right representation, because otherwise it'd be hard for me to say that if one group was just one homogenous group, or one group that was all the same, could represent every group and every person. If it was just me by myself creating the space, then I don't know if we'd have the same success. So, and when you look at it, if you actually look at the facts, only 23% of HR professionals believe that their EDI programs are actually effective. And that's because there's a big difference between the design component and the actual implementation. So knowing the data, knowing who you're working with and who they are is important, but also ensuring that you get people that are different and intentionally hiring, even if it takes you longer. I've often, and Andrew, I know we don't want to be long, but I have to say this. There are so many times that I've heard, I do want to hire, Black professionals or ex-professionals or whatever, but I just can't find them. For every person that is, has been hired in whatever role, there is a diverse representative, there's diverse people and populations who can do the same job, if not equal to, they can do it better. Because as I mentioned before, they've had impediments along the way in their journey during their career. So make sure that you're intentional about these things. And I guarantee you that you will see profits, you will see better dialogue and communication and innovation within your workspace. So yes, data is very important, and being intentional about your hiring is also very important.
Mm-hmm. So you made reference to one of the questions, Darius. So one of the questions submitted is around what advice you have for companies on addressing the feeling of EDI being a checkbox from employees. What are some of the tangible things you can do to gain trust in the long term?
I think starting there is, having conversations. When Andrea, myself, and Sneha embarked on this journey, we had one-on-one conversations with each other as to what they were looking and expecting for. Then we met with the EDI committee, and we talked to the committee about what they wanted to learn and see. And for me, that was incredibly important, with people self-identifying what was important to them, especially for those who work within that space and care about that space and have dedicated their spare time to enabling and empowering that space. And then we also met with the executive team to have that understanding. And so you can see that these meetings are 3 separate meetings with different groups, because as we always say and understand, diversity can be messy, but it's also very important to make sure that you have an understanding of all of the groups that you're working with. So when you're looking at creating spaces and knowledge and implementation for these things, some of the tangible things that you can do, again, collecting data, then you revisit that data. By taking out the data that you've had, you can see an area for concern. Well, it looks like our organization is 99% white male, then you have a problem with diversity there, right? So how can you build, that's your area of concern. Then you work on your policy and say, you know what, based on this information that we receive, we want to create a more inclusive space, and we will be intentional about bringing 50% or 25% or whatever that number is. Don't just say we aim to hire more diverse people. What does that even mean? It's a vague commitment. So be intentional, write it down. And when you see that area of concern, address it within your policy, right? Then you can implement it, and you measure it by, creating a survey or questionnaire in two ways. One, we talked about self-ID a little bit, but you can also have a closed focus group. When I met with the EDI committee, I learned so much about their passions. I learned so much about women in the workplace and the need to create a safe space for them to engage and have families and to be successful. So you're using the information to assess it, but then you're also coming up with different ways to create inclusive workspaces. So you can make sure that you have representation in your workspace, make sure that you're hiring the right people. You can assess your retention. So we've hired, let's say we've hired 9 Asian people within the past 2 years. They're all gone. Well, that tells you something. Or we've hired 9 people, Asian, let's go with that sentiment. We've hired 9 Asian people, but they're all within the lower rung scope of the workplace. So how do we balance out the playing field? Is there diversity in executive management? Are there diversity in different levels? And making sure that representation and that retention is spread across. And then also ensuring that there's funding in those spaces, and training and testing. So I could go on a little bit further, but also looking at the time here, I'm not sure. I think that answers the question. Sneha, I see you're unmuted. You might have something that I really, really missed that you think is important there.
Yeah, just really quickly, just to kind of highlight Darius kind of talked about the various process we went through to kind of get to where we're getting to. And mind you, it's just the beginning of our journey. But I think what I really wanted to highlight this is not a one and done thing. EDI cannot be one workshop. It cannot be just one educational training session to do with the company and assume that everyone gets it right off the bat. This is a process. This is a journey. And so what's really important to kind of recognize is that have this ongoing discussion, have this as an ongoing strategy and not a one and done thing.
Perfect. Thank you, Sneha. And the last question, again, with just a little under a minute left to answer, I do want to highlight for those who are still with us that if you are curious about some of the legislative changes that are coming down the pipeline for organizations, please read into Bill C-25. That is a really good indication of the government's perspective of what their expectations are for federally regulated and distributing companies. And so it's a good place to start as a benchmark as a small organization who may be looking to implement metrics, targets, policy, and reporting within your organization. So on that note, we have a question here around structuring growth and promotion plans. And so I read somewhere that women are often assessed from their performance based on past performance, and men are often assessed in future performance or future potential, sorry. And so the question reads, how can I structure growth and promotion paths with a diversity and inclusive focus?
Well, I'll start off there. And I think that's incredibly true. It's about one, the knowledge and information. Like Sneha mentioned, you want to make sure that everyone has that same access to that knowledge. If you're working with folks, whether they're in the HR department or the executive level, and they don't have this knowledge, and you haven't assessed through surveys and whatnot that there is a difference and there's a pay gap, then why should I make any changes? So I think getting to that level of knowledge and getting everyone on the same page is important, but also ensuring that people have a career progress plan. So this can be mandated. This can be mandated throughout your organization for each manager, because you can do this objectively. I mandate that one of my managers meet with their team and their members every 6 months or whatever the case may be, and that's to talk about future planning, how they see themselves, where they see themselves growing. And I've personally done this on all of the teams that I've been a part of, because I care about my team. I care about who they are, their backgrounds, if they have a birthday that's never been celebrated before, all of these things. And when you start in that space and with those conversations, you're able to then bring that further along. So this also means asking and creating the space. And I've said this before, creating the space for mentorship. It's weird that oftentimes, and I've seen this in workspaces, that men like me will have an opportunity to meet with the CEO and go and have a drink. But women might not have the same opportunity, or if they do have the same opportunity, they're not treated in the same way, right? It's a different space. So I think the opportunity for creating safe mentorship spaces in that realm and being clear about who you want, where you want to go within your career space should be at the utmost, importance for people to consider. So if you haven't done that on your own, make some time. Retract. This is a goal setting that I often do with youth. Retract, look at LinkedIn, see the career pathways that you can have based on your career, and look at where you want to be. Then have conversations, whether internally within your organization or even externally. There are so many times where I put people in touch with other people because they want someone who looks and feels like them to mentor them. They want to be mentored by, an older Trinidadian lady who has experience in government, rather than whoever's internal within their organization. So it doesn't have to be internal, but make sure you have those conversations and try to cultivate that space and career planning for yourself.
Yeah, it goes both ways, both managing up internally and then making sure that as a HR business partner, as an HR leader, or even as a people leader within your organization, you have targets and you're building a process. And the question specifically was around having a promotion path with diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And again, we talked about the importance of data. And again, we're emphasizing the importance of having targets. So if you have a plan that encompasses both of those elements, then that at least is a good starting point. And so we are at 2:01. I just wanted to say thank you to both of our panelists today. Darius, so your contact information for those who might be interested in reaching out are there. Sneha, again, thank you so much for your expertise. Hopefully folks who are still online have learned about equity, diversity, and inclusion, some of the things that you can do within your organization to build policies, structure, and an EDI committee, inclusive language, and allyship. And with that, I'd like to also have a reminder to those who are interested that we are talking about how to manage mental health in the workplace when returning back to office. And so for those who might be interested in participating in that, it is happening on July 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And of course, you can visit the HUME website /webinars for more information. So thank you again for participating. Thank you again to our HUME team for managing such a great event. And thank you finally to Darius with Enteliki and Sneha for your expertise, your thoughts, and your leadership in this space.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Good luck.